일이 됐습니까?
내가 분명히 줄 당기지 말라고 그렇게 말을 했는데 말을 참 진짜 안 듣네. 아유.
그래서 말인데
아직 어린데 용기가 있구나.
그걸 왜 이제 말하는 거야? 어디요?
저기
대비마마, 이제 하나 남은 영안군마저 저렇게 아프시니 이 나라의 후사가 참으로 걱정이다.
동궁의 궤변이 그늘
막을 수가 없지요.
하지만 우리 가는 그리 탁해지고 거기를 막고 세
A palace wall is supposed to keep danger outside. In the East Palace, it does the opposite. The higher those walls rise, the more completely they trap everyone with something that refuses to remain buried. That contradiction is our first clue. This is not simply a haunted palace story in which restless spirits appear from dark corridors and frighten anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. The palace itself feels like a sealed box. Every locked chamber protects a secret. Every ritual hides a fear. Every expression of loyalty carries the possibility of betrayal. And beneath the ceremonial beauty of royal life, something old is waiting for the right person to hear it. Welcome to the Film Box, where we take stories apart piece by piece, follow the smallest clues and discover the machinery working beneath the surface. Every film is a box. We open it together. Today, that box takes us into the supernatural world of the East Palace, a Korean historical dark fantasy series where political power and spiritual danger occupy the same corridors. It brings together Gu-cheon, a gifted but difficult spirit slayer, and Saeng-gang, a palace woman burdened with the ability to hear the dead. Their powers seem useful from the outside. No closer though, and both gifts begin to resemble forms of isolation. That is where this story becomes more interesting than its premise initially suggests. Hearing what nobody else can hear does not automatically give Saeng-gang power. It can leave her carrying truths that others cannot confirm and may not want exposed. Being able to confront spirits does not make Gu-cheon fearless. It forces him into a relationship with a hidden world that ordinary people can deny. One character receives voices. The other answers them with force. Yet neither can move freely through the human world surrounding them. Put those two details together and the mechanism begins to appear. The supernatural threat is not separate from the palace's politics. It is another language through which those politics speak. A royal court depends upon appearances. Authority must look stable even when it is trembling. Ceremonies must continue even when fear has entered the room. Every person must perform the correct role because one uncontrolled truth could destabilize the entire structure. Ghosts are dangerous in such a world not merely because they can harm the living, but because they remember what the living have agreed to conceal. That idea gives the East Palace its emotional tension. The dead do not respect rank. They do not care which version of history was officially approved. They pass through guarded doors, ignore court etiquette, and force private guilt into public space. Their presence turns every beautiful room into a possible crime scene and every royal tradition into a question. Who benefits from silence? Who is protected when the truth disappears? And what happens when the person capable of hearing that truth has almost no control over whether anyone believes her? We will follow those questions without rushing toward the answers. First, we will examine the atmosphere that makes this world convincing. We will look at how the series uses space, costume, darkness, sound, and restrained movement to make the palace feel both magnificent and suffocating. We will consider why humor sometimes enters the story precisely when the supernatural pressure becomes strongest. We will also test whether the tone mixture gives the characters humanity or weakens the danger surrounding them. Most importantly, we will track the story's central contradiction. Everyone inside the palace is obsessed with protecting royal continuity. Yet the methods used to preserve that continuity may be feeding the very curse threatening it. That is not a spoiler. It is the question hiding inside the premise. A curse in a royal household is never only about an angry spirit. It is about inheritance. It is about consequences passed from one generation to another. It is about people receiving power without necessarily understanding the pain that made such power possible. The palace can replace a servant, silence a witness, or rewrite an official account. What it cannot easily replace is the future represented by its heirs. Once that future comes under attack, the entire institution begins to reveal its priorities. The East Palace invites you to watch two investigations unfold at once. One searches for the supernatural source of the threat. The other asks what kind of human system allowed that threat to grow. The first requires courage, perception, and confrontation. The second demands something even more dangerous inside a royal court, honesty. So keep your attention on the moments when someone hears what others cannot. Notice who treats silence as safety and who understands that silence can become evidence. Watch the distance between what the palace displays and what it conceals. Because the most gripping thing inside this box is not that the dead have begun to speak. It is that the living may already know why. And that creates the unsettling possibility at the heart of the East Palace. Perhaps the haunting is not an invasion at all. Perhaps it is a return. The palace treats supernatural disturbances as threats to order. That response makes perfect sense on the surface. A royal household cannot allow fear to spread, especially when the future of the crown is already under pressure. But every attempt to contain the disturbance also raises a sharper question. If these spirits have no connection to the institution, why do they appear so deeply woven into its private spaces? This is what makes the series difficult to dismiss as a simple battle between humans and ghosts. The obvious conflict gives us people with unusual abilities confronting dangerous forces. The hidden conflict is about ownership. Who truly owns the palace, the rulers currently occupying it, or the memories embedded in its walls? Gu-cheon enters this environment as someone who can face what trained guards cannot. A weapon can stop a visible attacker, but it is useless against an accusation that has survived beyond death. His strength gives the court a practical answer to an impossible problem. Yet it also gives the story a fascinating tension. The palace wants his ability without wanting the uncomfortable world his ability proves exists. Saeng-gang creates the opposite problem. She does not simply fight what is hidden, she receives it. Her connection to the dead makes her valuable, but value inside a royal court is never the same as safety. If she hears something inconvenient, her gift can quickly be treated as a weakness, a deception, or even a danger to the people she is trying to protect. One character can enter the spiritual conflict through action. The other is pulled into it through perception. Together, they form an imperfect bridge between the palace and everything it has refused to acknowledge. But here is the hook. The more effective that bridge becomes, the less stable the official version of reality appears. The palace needs the supernatural problem solved quietly. It wants the fear removed while leaving its deeper structures untouched. Gu-cheon and Saeng-gang cannot easily do that, because every clue carries them closer to the relationship between spiritual anger and human choice. Eliminating a frightening presence may address the immediate danger. It does not answer why that presence exists, whom it remembers, or what debt it believes remains unpaid. The East Palace therefore builds suspense through two competing clocks. The first is visible. Something threatening is moving closer, and the people in power need an answer before the consequences become irreversible. The second is hidden. Each discovery reduces the amount of time the palace can continue pretending that its secrets are separate from its crisis. That second clock is more dangerous because it transforms nearly everyone into a possible obstacle. A person does not need to be cruel to protect a destructive system. Fear is often enough. Loyalty can be enough. The desire to preserve peace can become enough. Someone may conceal information because they believe the truth would create chaos, without realizing that their silence is allowing an older chaos to grow. This turns every relationship into a test. When a character offers help, we have to ask what they are protecting. When someone refuses to speak, we have to consider whether the silence comes from guilt, terror, devotion, or all three. Even acts of apparent kindness acquire uncertainty because compassion inside the palace must survive constant pressure from hierarchy. The supernatural elements sharpen that uncertainty. A ghost cannot be judged by ordinary political logic. It may carry pain, rage, memory, or manipulation. Hearing a voice does not prove that the voice is honest. Seeing suffering does not reveal the entire chain of responsibility behind it. Saeng-gang's ability opens a door, but it does not provide an effortless answer. Gu-cheon's power can confront danger, but power alone cannot determine which version of the past deserves belief. That is where the series finds its most compelling idea. The heroes are not simply trying to uncover a secret. They must learn how to evaluate truth in a world where both the living and the dead can be driven by unfinished desires. The palace looks solid because everyone behaves as if its rules are permanent. The haunting reveals how fragile those rules become when memory refuses to obey them. Authority can command servants, soldiers, officials, and relatives. It cannot command grief to disappear. It cannot order resentment to forget its source. And it cannot guarantee that a secret will remain buried once the people who created it are gone. So the question pulling us deeper into the East Palace is not whether Gu-cheon and Saeng-gang can defeat whatever waits inside those royal walls. The real question is, what will remain of the palace's carefully protected identity once they discover what the haunting wants? To understand why that question carries so much weight, we need to step behind the lens and examine the creative choices that build a strange meeting point between historical power, dark fantasy, and emotional isolation. The East Palace was designed as a limited series rather than a feature film, and that format immediately changes the way its mystery can operate. Released worldwide through Netflix on July 17, 2026, it has room to let suspicion spread gradually through different corners of the royal compound. A movie would likely need to identify the central threat quickly and drive its heroes toward a concentrated confrontation. A series can allow uncertainty to breathe. It can introduce a disturbing image, move away from it, and return later after new information has altered its meaning. That additional space is important because the palace is not merely a backdrop. It is a network of competing territories. The king's private rooms, the women's quarters, ceremonial courtyards, hidden passages, ponds, gates, and spiritual spaces all carry different forms of authority. By moving through them over time, the series teaches you that physical distance inside the palace is also social distance. Two characters may live within the same walls while occupying completely different realities. Director Choi Jong-kyu brings a useful dramatic background to that structure. His previous work includes psychologically charged series such as Children of Nobody and The Devil Judge. Stories interested in damaged institutions and the complicated people moving through them. That experience can be felt in the way the East Palace treats authority. The court is not presented as a simple collection of heroes and villains. It behaves like a machine made from individual fears, ambitions, duties, and compromises. This matters whenever the king enters a scene. The direction does not need to announce his power through constant aggression. The architecture already does part of that work. Other characters adjust their posture, their voice, and even the speed of their movements around him. Power becomes visible through reaction. When supernatural disorder interrupts those carefully controlled patterns, the disturbance feels larger than a conventional scare. It damages the choreography of rule. Choi's approach also gives the horror a psychological edge. Instead of treating every dark space as an excuse for an immediate shock, the direction often asks you to study what a character believes might be there. That pose creates a more personal kind of fear. The palace contains spirits, but it also contains people who have trained themselves not to see certain things. The camera can therefore make denial suspenseful. A closed door becomes frightening not only because something may stand behind it, but because opening it could force a character to admit that the official explanation is false. The writing comes from Kwon So-ra and Seo Jae-won, whose earlier credits include The Guest and Burkasal, Immortal Souls. Both works combine supernatural mythology with emotional wounds that continue shaping the present. That creative history helps explain why the East Palace does not treat its spirit world as random decoration. The mythology has rules, categories, costs, and emotional causes. A ghost is not automatically the same thing as another ghost, and supernatural power does not function like a simple weapon that can be activated whenever the plot needs an escape. The writer's more important choice is to connect spiritual activity to unfinished human experience. This allows the mystery to work on two levels. The characters must learn what kind of entity they are confronting, but they must also discover which human decisions gave that entity power. The process resembles an investigation because classification matters. Misunderstanding the nature of a spirit can be as dangerous as misunderstanding the motive of a living suspect. That choice changes the function of exposition. When the series explains part of its supernatural world, the information is not merely background lore. It changes how we judge the threat. A frightening presence may become more tragic once its grievance is understood. Something that initially appears harmless may become more alarming once its true nature is identified. The writers use mythology to rearrange sympathy, not just to expand the fantasy. The central casting strengthens this mechanism. Nam Joo-hyuk plays Gu-cheon, Roh Yoon-seo plays Saeng-gang, and Cho Song-woo plays the king. These performers are not being asked to deliver three versions of solemn historical drama, seriousness. Their roles occupy different emotional temperatures. Gu-cheon can be irreverent and abrasive even when the situation demands ceremony. Nam's physical presence makes him credible as someone capable of entering dangerous spaces, but the more important quality is resistance. He appears uncomfortable with the behavior the palace expects from him. That friction stops the character from disappearing into the elegance of the setting. He looks like someone the institution needs but cannot completely absorb. According to Choi's comments surrounding the production, meeting Nam gave the director confidence in the casting, particularly because of the actor's commitment to the role. That confidence helps clarify Gu-cheon's scream function. He cannot feel like a polished royal warrior. His effectiveness must come with unpredictability. If he followed every court rule naturally, he would lose the outsider energy that allows him to question what insiders accept. Ro's casting works through a different contrast. Shui described her as bold and praised the honesty with which she moves through difficult situations. That quality suits Saeng-gang because the character's vulnerability cannot be passive. Hearing the dead exposes her to fear and doubt, yet the story also requires her to make decisions under pressures that stronger people avoid. Ro often lets uncertainty remain visible without allowing it to erase the character's determination. This is essential to the partnership between Saeng-gang and Gu-cheon. He can appear more immediately capable because his gift translates into action. Her ability is quieter, but it gives the investigation direction. The casting prevents that distinction from becoming an imbalance. Gu-cheon may control the energy of a confrontation, while Saeng-gang can control its meaning. Jo Sung-woo completes the triangle as a king whose authority cannot protect him from personal and dynastic fear. Wise's reunion with Cho was described by the director as a meaningful opportunity, and the familiarity between performer and filmmaker appears suited to a role built from restraint. The king must convince the court that he remains in control while privately confronting evidence that control may already be gone. Cho's precision allows tiny shifts to matter. A pause can suggest calculation. A controlled expression can imply that emotion is being suppressed rather than absent. This makes the king valuable to the mystery because his uncertainty does not need to be explained aloud. You can watch him decide which truth is politically survivable before he decides whether it is personally believable. The final major production choice is the creation of a distinct spiritual territory called the Realm of Kwai. This is more than a visual alternative to the palace. It gives the series two realities with different textures and rules. The royal world is organized through rank, ceremony, and controlled appearances. The spirit world is shaped by unresolved memory and forces that refuse human order. Crossing between them turns Gu-cheon into more than a hunter. He becomes a moving connection between two systems. Saeng-gang forms another connection through sound, while the king stands at the center of the institution, threatened by both. That three-part design, movement, perception, and authority gives the supernatural mystery its dramatic shape. The verified production details all point toward the same creative intention. The extended format gives the mystery space. The director understands institutional tension. The writers build supernatural systems around emotional consequences. The actors embody three incompatible relationships with power, and the realm of Gui provides a visual world where everything suppressed by the palace can take form. Now that we know how this box was constructed, we can open its outer compartment and define exactly what kind of story has been placed inside. The East Palace is a 2026 South Korean limited series directed by Choi Jung-kyu and written by Kwan, So-ra and Seo Jae-won, led by Nam Joo-hyuk as Gu-cheon, Ro Yoon-seo as Sang-gang, and Cho Sung-woo as the king. It combines historical drama, supernatural mystery, horror, action, and restrained romantic tension within a fictional royal setting. My spoiler-free verdict is straightforward. The series is visually impressive, rich in atmosphere, and built around a strong supernatural concept. But its tonal shifts and extended storytelling do not always work with equal precision. At its best, it creates the feeling that an entire institution is being haunted by its own memory. When it loses focus, the humor and repeated complications can weaken the pressure that its darker scenes build so effectively. The title is our next useful clue. An East Palace traditionally refers to the residence associated with the crown prince, the figure expected to carry royal power into the next generation. That makes the location symbolically perfect for this story. The curse does not threaten only the people presently ruling, it attacks continuity itself. The place meant to protect the future becomes the place where the future is most vulnerable. This is why the series exists as more than a collection of supernatural encounters. Its central premise places a royal bloodline, and therefore an entire political order, against a form of consequence that cannot be controlled by status. The court has guards, laws, physicians, ceremonies, and rigid chains of command. None of those systems can easily address a spirit whose grievance was created before the current crisis began. Gu-cheon is summoned because he can move through the world of spirits and confront entities ordinary people cannot reach. but his outsider status immediately complicates his usefulness. The palace depends on rules, while Gu-cheon survives through instincts that do not always respect them. He is invited inside because authority has run out of conventional answers, not because authority has suddenly become comfortable with people it cannot control. Saeng-gang serves as his necessary counterpart. Her ability to hear the dead makes her more than an assistant in the investigation. She detects intention where Gu-cheon might initially see only danger. Yet her gift comes with a private burden, and the palace gives her little room to separate who she is from what others need her to do. Their partnership works because neither possesses the complete solution. He can cross boundaries. She can interpret what waits beyond them. Then we have the king, played with controlled intensity by Cho Sung-woo. He is not watching the mystery from a safe distance. The curse reaches directly into the question of succession, which means every failed attempt to stop it is both a personal wound and a political emergency. He must protect his family, preserve the crown, manage the court, and decide how much truth he is willing to accept. At its heart, the East Palace is therefore a story about three people tracked by different forms of inheritance. The king inherits an institution and the consequences attached to it. Saeng-gang inherits a connection she did not freely choose. Gu-cheon carries abilities shaped by an earlier loss. Each character enters the palace with power, but none of them enters freely. Their gifts and positions function like contracts written before they understood the cost. The series draws energy from Korean supernatural traditions in which spirits may remain near the human world because something unresolved prevents them from leaving. It uses those ideas within the architecture of a royal mystery, allowing folklore and political drama to strengthen each other. The horror gives buried injustice a physical presence. The court drama explains why that injustice remained buried. This combination gives the story its identity. Remove the palace and the supernatural mystery loses its institutional pressure. Remove the spirits and the palace becomes another arena of human conspiracy. By placing both systems together, the series asks whether power can ever escape the suffering used to preserve it. You should consider watching the East Palace if you enjoy elaborate fantasy worlds, haunted historical settings, slow-building mysteries, complicated royal families, and characters who must investigate both supernatural danger and human deception. It will appeal especially to anyone who likes horror that carries emotional meaning rather than existing only for shock. If you want non-stop action or a tightly compressed mystery, the pacing may test your patience. The series prefers to accumulate atmosphere, relationships, and mythology before releasing its larger answers. Its playful exchanges can also feel surprising beside its darkest material. Whether that contrast feels refreshing or disruptive will depend on how firmly you want the story to maintain its horror tone, but the reason to care is simple. The haunting is aimed at a place designed to represent tomorrow. Every death, warning, and hidden voice therefore challenges the palace's claim that the future belongs to it. We understand the shape of the box now. The next question is what it feels like when that box first begins to open. The opening of the East Palace does not feel like an invitation into royal grandeur. It feels like arriving after the palace has already made a terrible mistake. From its earliest moments, the series presents beauty under pressure. The buildings are carefully ordered, the clothing is richly detailed, and every formal movement suggests that this world has spent generations perfecting the appearance of control. Yet the atmosphere refuses to cooperate. Darkness gathers around the architecture. Water feels less like part of a peaceful garden and more like a sealed entrance. Silence does not create calm. It creates the expectation that something is listening. The opening reaches back into the royal family's history and establishes that the present danger is connected to a wound approximately 3 decades old. A young prince encounters a crisis that the adults around him cannot explain through ordinary logic. What matters emotionally is not simply that frightening events occur. It is that childhood and authority suddenly exchange places. The people responsible for maintaining safety become powerless, while a child is forced to absorb an experience that will shape the ruler he becomes. That choice gives the king's later resistance to supernatural explanations a more complicated meaning. This belief can be rational, but it can also become a defense. If accepting the existence of the curse means reopening the most terrifying part of his past, then denial offers temporary emotional protection. The series does not need to explain all of this immediately. Cho Sang-woo's controlled performance allows that earlier fear to exist beneath the king's authority, like a crack hidden under polished stone. My first reaction to this opening is that the series understands the difference between mystery and confusion. It gives us enough information to feel the shape of the danger without handing us a complete explanation. We know that the royal line is vulnerable. We understand that the palace has experienced something it failed to resolve. We can sense that water, memory, and succession are connected. What we do not know is which version of the past has been preserved and which has been deliberately excluded. That balance makes the first 10 minutes difficult to ignore. The premise might lead you to expect an immediate fantasy adventure centered on a confident spirit slayer. Instead, the opening begins by establishing emotional depth. Before Gu-cheon can confront anything, the story wants us to feel that the palace has been living on borrowed time. The supernatural threat is not waiting for a hero to arrive. It has already influenced the psychology of the ruler, the behavior of the court, and the future of the royal household. Then the series begins widening its tone. When Gu-cheon enters the narrative, his energy challenges the solemn atmosphere created by the palace. He does not respond to spiritual danger with the terrified obedience that the court expects from ordinary people. His familiarity with ghosts allows him to treat some supernatural encounters as irritating, strange, or even absurd. This gives the character immediate personality, but it also introduces one of the series' most divisive creative choices. The movement between horror and humor can make the world feel alive. People do not remain emotionally frozen simply because danger exists. Humor becomes a form of resistance, especially for someone who has spent much of his life around frightening entities. Guo Tang's attitude tells us that supernatural experience has become routine for him, even if it remains unimaginable to everyone else. At the same time, the lighter moments can release tension faster than the horror earns it. A disturbing image may place you in a state of uncertainty only for playful behavior to remind you that the series also wants to be entertaining in a more accessible way. Some people will enjoy that flexibility. Others may wish the opening protected its darker mood for longer. Saeng-gang steadies the tonal movement. Her relationship with the dead does not feel casual, because sound reaches her before certainty does. She can detect the presence without immediately understanding its motive or location. That makes her seeing psychologically different from Gu-cheon's. His danger often becomes physical. Hers begins as intrusion. The opening world consequently develops two kinds of suspense. Journeys you wonder what will appear. Saeng-gang makes you wonder what has already entered the scene without being seen. That distinction is one of the smartest early choices. It prevents the abilities from feeling repetitive and makes their eventual cooperation necessary. She cannot solve every danger by hearing it, and he cannot understand every spirit by confronting it. The series begins assembling them like two halves of an investigative instrument. View Later Palace creates an immediate sense of scale without providing comfort. Large courtyards expose characters instead of freeing them. Long corridors create depth while suggesting that help may be too far away. Rooms filled with servants can still feel lonely because rank prevents honest communication. The production does not need to empty the palace to make it frightening. Crowds become another form of concealment. What hooked me most was the way the opening transforms royal privilege into vulnerability. The king has access to every visible resource, but the danger moves through channels his authority cannot govern. Saeng-gang holds information the court lacks, yet her position limits how safely she can use it. Dengan possesses the required power, but entering the palace places that power under royal control. Nobody has everything they need. That creates a strong dramatic trap. The institution must depend on outsiders and overlooked people, while those people must operate inside an institution that can punish them if they reveal too much. The curse is terrifying, but cooperation may be nearly as difficult. By the end of the opening movement, the palace no longer feels like a place being attacked from outside. It feels like a body reacting to something buried within it. The characters are not simply entering a haunted building. They are stepping into a memory that has developed its own force. And once the atmosphere has convinced us of that, the camera, lighting, editing, color, and sound begin showing exactly how the illusion is maintained. The visual language of the East Palace is built around controlled beauty being invaded by unstable shapes. During formal palace scenes, the camera frequently favors balanced compositions. Doorways, pillars, screens, and roof lines divide the frame into clean sections. Characters are placed according to status, with the most powerful figure often occupying the visual center, while everyone else forms an orderly pattern around them. This symmetry makes authority look natural, almost architectural. Then the supernatural presence begins disturbing that order. Figures appear near the edge of the frame. Empty space becomes suspicious. A doorway that previously functioned as elegant background suddenly looks like an opening through which something might enter. The composition may remain beautiful, but you stop trusting it. That is an effective horror technique, because the series does not always need to show a spirit clearly. It teaches you to search the frame before revealing whether your anxiety is justified. The camera's distance also changes the meaning of palace space. Wide shots emphasize scale, but the characters can appear small inside that scale. The royal compound is impressive when seen as architecture and oppressive when experienced as a human environment. Walls stretch beyond individuals. Corridors repeat. Courtyard create large areas where someone is visible but not necessarily safe. Closer framing works differently. Faces are often contained by vertical lines created by doors, curtains, and wooden structures. These frames within the frame suggest that characters are always being observed or restricted. Even private emotion appears trapped inside the palace's design. The technique is particularly effective with the king because his position gives him enormous authority, while the flaming reminds us that he is also confined by the role. Camera movement is generally most effective when it remains patient. A slow approach creates the feeling that the scene is being pushed toward a discovery. A measured movement through a hallway lets the background remain active, encouraging you to examine shadows and openings. When the series accelerates for combat or pursuit, the contrast makes the physical action feel like a rupture in the palace's controlled rhythm. The movement associated with Gu-cheon tends to be more flexible. His body cuts across formal lines rather than settling comfortably within them. The visual design uses him as disruption even before he acts. Saeng-gang is often handled with greater stillness because her ability depends on receiving something unseen. When she stops moving, the scene becomes attentive with her. The absence of action creates its own pressure. Lighting establishes a constant argument between visibility and concealment. Daylight does not fully remove unease because interiors remain divided into areas of illumination and shadow. At night, practical sources create small zones of safety surrounded by darkness. A lamp can reveal a face while leaving the space behind that face uncertain. The light therefore tells us what a character knows, while the darkness represents everything still withheld. Red is used as a warning color, but its power comes from the surrounding restraint. Against muted wood, dark water, paint fabric, and subdued natural tones, red carries emotional force. It can suggest royal authority, danger, bloodline, anger, or spiritual contamination without requiring the narration to explain which meaning is active. The color gathers significance as different contexts repeat it. Water receives another distinct visual treatment. Its surface can reflect the palace, but reflection is never the same as truth. An image in water appears complete while remaining vulnerable to the slightest movement. That makes it a perfect visual symbol for the royal court. The institution presents a stable image of itself, yet one disturbance can break that image into fragments. The realm of Gui allows the series to push beyond the physical texture of the palace. The visual atmosphere becomes less governed by ordinary depth and direction. Haze, darkness, altered color, and unnatural spatial relationships make the world feel as though memory has replaced architecture. The transition is effective because the series does not treat the spirit world as simply another location. It feels like entering a different logic. Production design carries much of the storytelling. Screens and curtains allow people to hear without being seen. Gates turn permission into a physical object. Raised platforms translate rank into height. Ponds and enclosed gardens create spaces that appear peaceful until their isolation becomes threatening. every design element can perform two jobs: establishing the historical fantasy world and controlling who can access information. Costume operates through a similar double function. Clothing communicates position immediately, but it also controls movement. Formal garments can make authority appear composed even when the person wearing them is under severe pressure. Gu-cheon's presentation separates him from courtly polish, while Saeng-gang's court clothing places her visibly inside the institution despite her unusual connection to the world beyond it. The editing rhythm is strongest when it allows images to remain a fraction longer than comfort requires. A quick cut can surprise you, but a delayed cut makes you question the entire frame. The series often builds fear from anticipation, then uses sharper editing when a concealed force becomes active. That shift from observation to reaction mirrors the investigation itself. First, the characters sense. Then they identify. Finally, they respond. Sound may be the most important technique because one central character experiences the supernatural through hearing. Whispered voices, distant movement, water, wind, fabric, and sudden silence all become evidence. The soundtrack can place Saeng-gang's experience inside your own perception. You may hear something before the image explains it, briefly sharing her uncertainty. Music supports the scale of the fantasy, but silence often delivers the greater tension. When ceremonial or dramatic sound falls away, the palace seems to expose its hidden breathing. The absence of music prevents emotional comfort and forces attention towards smaller noises. Together, these techniques produce a world where every polished surface may hide a second image. Symmetry represents control. Framing represents confinement. Water represents unstable memory. Sound represents truth searching for a listener. The filmmaking does not merely decorate the mystery. It turns the palace into the mystery's central piece of evidence. The story begins with a royal court facing a death it cannot explain without endangering itself. A crown prince has been found lifeless in the pond beside the East Palace, and the location immediately revives a story that the king has spent decades trying to suppress. 30 years earlier, several royal princes died under similarly mysterious circumstances. A courtwoman who had been condemned by the palace was believed to have returned as a resentful spirit, promising to destroy the royal bloodline. Only one prince survived that earlier tragedy. Born far down the line of succession to a low-ranking concubine, he eventually became the present king. That history creates the king's central obstacle. If he publicly accepts the curse, he admits that his rule may be built on a supernatural disaster the palace never resolved. He also strengthened the Queen Dowager, who can argue that the surviving royal line is contaminated and must be replaced. If he denies the curse, however, he has to explain why his sons are dying in the same way as the princes before them. The king chooses denial. He presents the deaths as the result of a human conspiracy, because a conspiracy can be investigated, punished, and used to justify greater control. A curse cannot. His choice is politically understandable, but it also narrows the investigation before it begins. He is not searching freely for the truth. He is searching for an answer that will preserve the throne. That distinction matters. The king's real desire is not simply to protect his family. He wants to protect a version of reality in which his authority remains meaningful. His position becomes impossible when Prince Yang and his last surviving son suddenly collapses. The threat is no longer a rumor attached to previous deaths. It is an approaching deadline. If the boy dies, the king loses both his child and the future of his direct bloodline. With ordinary methods failing, the king secretly summons Gu-cheon from his remote life away from the court. Gu-cheon can see spirits, confront dangerous entities, and cross into the realm of Gui. These abilities make him the obvious solution, but the king does not recruit him through trust. He makes the mission a form of captivity. Gu-cheon must eliminate the spirit connected to the pond or accept that he may never leave the palace alive. This arrangement reveals the king's governing instinct. Even when he needs someone, he converts dependence into control. He cannot command the supernatural world, so he commands the man capable of entering it. Chan initially approaches the task with reluctance rather than heroic purpose. The palace's suffering is not automatically his responsibility. He understands spirits better than the officials surrounding him, and that knowledge makes their fear look both justified and frustratingly ignorant. His immediate goal is practical: identify the entity, complete the mission, and regain his freedom. But the palace will not allow the problem to remain that simple. The king assigns Saeng-gang to accompany Gu-cheon. Officially, she can guide him through a world whose customs and restricted spaces he does not understand. Her ability to hear spirits also makes her essential to the investigation. Unofficially, she is expected to observe him and ensure that his actions remain useful to the crown. Their partnership therefore begins with concealed motives. Gu-cheon knows the palace is using him. Saeng-gang knows she has been positioned as both collaborator and restraint. Neither has a strong reason to trust the other, yet their abilities are incomplete when separated. Gu-cheon can recognize and fight what ordinary eyes cannot perceive, but a dangerous spirit is not merely a physical target. Its resentment has a history. Saeng-gang can hear fragments of that history through the dead, but those voices do not always provide a clean explanation. They carry fear, anger, confusion, and incomplete memory. The investigation becomes a process of combining action with interpretation. Their first major assumption is that the pawn spirit from 30 years earlier has returned to complete her threat. The evidence appears convincing. The deaths repeat an old pattern. The pawn remains the spiritual center of the disturbance. The royal bloodline is again under attack. Every visible clue leads back to the condemned woman and the resentment she carried at her death. Yet the investigation slowly exposes a problem with that explanation. A repeated pattern does not necessarily prove a repeated cause. This is the key mechanism inside the story. The palace has told the same frightening account for so long that the account has become a tool. Once everyone expects the pawn spirit to be responsible, a human being can commit an act that resembles the curse and allows superstition to absorb suspicion. Gu-cheon does not immediately understand the scale of this possibility because his experience encourages him to look for supernatural classifications. He asks what kind of spirit they are facing and what force binds it to the human realm. Saeng-gang approaches the mystery through personal connection. The voices she hears begin pushing her toward people and secrets the official investigation would rather ignore. Her position becomes increasingly painful. She is not an ordinary court woman with an unusual gift. She carries a hidden relationship to the royal family. She is the king's illegitimate daughter, making the crisis part of her own bloodline even though the palace has denied her the protection usually attached to royal birth. Her mother's unexplained death adds another compartment to the mystery. Saeng-gang has lived with unresolved grief, and the investigation offers the possibility that the same palace now demanding her loyalty may contain the truth about what happened. Every new clue therefore asks her to choose between obedience to the king and honesty toward the dead. That choice changes her relationship with Gu-cheon. He begins as someone she must supervise. Gradually, he becomes the one person capable of entering the places where her questions lead. She begins as his guide and observer. Gradually, she becomes the reason the mission means more than survival. Their connection does not develop because the story suddenly forgets the curse. It develops because both understand what it means to have an unwanted ability attached to an earlier loss. Gu-cheon's power emerged from a childhood tragedy in which he survived while his mother did not. Saeng-gang's hearing keeps her surrounded by voices connected to pain she cannot fully resolve. They recognize in each other the exhaustion of being treated as useful for the very condition that causes them suffering. As their trust grows, the palace becomes more hostile to the investigation it created. The king wants results, but restricts the conclusions they are allowed to reach. The Queen Dowager has her own concern with succession and legitimacy. Servants and officials possess fragments of knowledge, but understand that truth can be fatal when it threatens royal history. The investigators are surrounded by information and starved of honest testimony. Gu-cheon eventually enters the spiritual realm connected to the palace pond. This descent gives the story an apparent path toward resolution. If he can reach the resentful spirit and sever the force binding her to the human world, the curse should end. It is the solution the king demanded, the answer Palace rumor expects, and the confrontation Gu-cheon's abilities were built to survive. He succeeds in overcoming the entity believed to be responsible. For one brief moment, the box appears closed. The old spirit has been confronted. The royal family should be safe. Gu-cheon should have fulfilled his obligation. Saeng-gang should no longer need to chase voices through the palace. But nothing actually becomes quiet. Saeng-gang continues hearing the dead, and their message points away from the defeated spirit. They identify a deeper evil connected not to the pond alone, but to the king and the history of his rise. Then Prince Yongan dies despite the supposed source of the curse having been removed. That consequence destroys the palace's preferred explanation. If the pond spirit caused every death, ending her resentment should have ended the pattern. The continued tragedy proves that the investigation has confused the visible weapon with the hidden mechanism. Someone has used supernatural fear as cover, and the false explanation has survived because it protects more than one guilty person. Gu-cheon and Saeng-gang now face a transformed mystery. Their task is no longer to defeat the spirit named by palace legend. They must identify who benefited from that legend, who preserved it for 30 years, and who has copied its pattern in the present. The king becomes impossible to read cleanly. His insistence that the original deaths were human acts may mean he understood more than he admitted. His refusal to explain that certainty suggests that the truth threatens his legitimacy. His desperation to protect Yongan appears genuine, but genuine love does not erase concealed guilt. Saeng-gang's family history moves toward the center. The person she trusted as refuge after her mother's death may know far more about the first chain of murders than she ever revealed. The royal family's curse begins to resemble an inheritance of choices. One generation commits an act for power, another protects the secret, and the third learns that violence can be disguised as faith. This is where the clue trail finally changes direction. The question is no longer whether a ghost can destroy a royal family. The question is why human beings repeatedly choose to imitate the ghost whenever power is within reach. The palace has blamed resentment from the dead because accepting that explanation is easier than admitting that ambition among the living created the pattern. Gu-cheon's strength can defeat a spirit. It cannot erase a lie shared by an entire institution. Saeng-gang's hearing can expose buried testimony. It cannot protect her from the emotional cost of discovering who buried it. To complete the mission, both must stop treating the palace as the victim of the curse and begin examining how the palace manufactured the conditions that made the curse believable. The pond was never merely a place where danger waited. It was a mirror in which the royal family saw a supernatural enemy instead of its own repeated choices. And this is the moment the box opens completely. The strongest achievement of the East Palace is the way it turns investigation into a conflict between different kinds of knowledge. Gu-cheon understands spirits through experience. Saeng-gang receives information through voices. The king knows political history but conceals the parts that threaten him. The Queen Dowager understands the machinery of succession. Each character holds something valuable, yet nobody holds enough truth to solve the mystery alone. That structure keeps exposition active. Information is rarely neutral. When someone reveals a fact, we also have to ask why they were willing to reveal it, what they removed, and whose position the new version protects. The mystery does not advance only by discovering clues. It advances by exposing the interests attached to those clues. Roh Yun-soo gives the most emotionally accessible performance. Saeng-gang could easily have become a passive supernatural receiver who exists mainly to tell Gu-cheon where the next spirit is located. Roh avoids that by making listening feel like a decision. You can see Saeng-gang judging whether a voice deserves trust, whether speaking about it will place her in danger, and whether silence would betray someone who can no longer speak for themselves. One especially effective stretch comes when the investigation begins pointing toward her own family history. Roh does not play the realization as one clean burst of shock. The emotion arrives in stages. Hope weakens into suspicion. Suspicion becomes resistance. Resistance finally gives way to the recognition that the people who provided comfort may also have shaped her pain. That revelation gives the revelation human weight beyond its function as a plot twist. Nam Joo-hyuk commands the screen through movement and attitude. Gu-cheon's sarcasm sometimes divides the tone, but Nam makes the character's irreverence feel connected to survival. A person constantly surrounded by spirits might need to reduce them psychologically, treating terrifying entities as irritating problems rather than granting them control over every emotion. His best scenes are not necessarily the loudest battles. They are the moments when Gu-cheon's practiced indifference begins failing. Once Saeng-gang's history becomes entangled with the curse, his motivation shifts. He is no longer confronting spirits only because the king has trapped him in a mission. The change is visible in the way his energy becomes more focused. Concern replaces performance. Cho Song-woo provides the series with its most complex form of restraint. The king is simultaneously powerful, frightened, loving, deceptive, and morally compromised. Cho rarely allows one quality to erase the others. When Pin Seong-gan's condition worsens, the king's fear feels real, yet that fear does not automatically make him innocent. When he denies the curse, his refusal can sound politically rational while his expression suggests personal history pressing against every word. That ambiguity is essential. A weaker performance might invite us to classify the king too early as either a desperate father or a calculating ruler. Cho makes both interpretations remain active. His stillness becomes a defensive wall, and the rare moments when that stillness breaks feel consequential. The story construction also deserves credit for using the pawn spirit as a false center. From the beginning, the location, history, and pattern or direct attention toward one supernatural explanation. The investigation then provides what looks like confirmation. Gu-cheon can reach the spirit, identify its resentment, and confront it. In another story, that would be the climax. Here, it becomes evidence that the characters have solved the wrong problem. The continued deaths after the apparent victory force us to reconsider everything. The series does not say the spirit world was irrelevant. It says supernatural truth and human guilt have been layered over each other. A real haunting can exist while also providing cover for living criminals. That is a much richer mechanism than revealing that every ghost was imaginary or that every human suspect was controlled by a single evil entity. The direction supports this layered structure by allowing the palace and realm of Kwai to feel connected but distinct. The palace is governed by lines, ranks, and control distance. The spirit realm feels unstable, organic, and shaped by emotion. Moving between them does not merely create visual variety, it shows two systems attempting to explain the same history. The descent into the realm beneath the pond is the series' most unforgettable visual sequence. Water, darkness, suspended movement, and distorted space turn the location into a physical version of submerged memory. Gu-cheon is not only entering supernatural territory, he is passing beneath the palace's visible history and confronting the resentment on which that history has rested. The scene works because the imagery completes an idea established much earlier. The pond surface reflects the palace, offering a clean image of royal order. Beneath that reflection exists an entire world of unresolved suffering. The visual metaphor is clear without becoming empty decoration. Production design gives the story similar depth. The palace appears large enough to contain a government, but intimate enough to preserve family secrets. Public chambers communicate authority. Private rooms compress characters around hidden motives. Gates and screens constantly regulate access, reminding us that information moves according to rank. Music and sound help the series distinguish fear from spectacle. Larger musical passages support the fantasy scale, but the most effective supernatural moments often reduce the score and allow smaller noises to dominate. A voice at the edge of hearing can create more tension than a loud musical warning because it forces you into Saeng-gang's uncertainty. Sound also prevents the dead from becoming merely visual creatures. Their defining power is communication. They interrupt the official story by continuing to speak after the palace believes it has silenced them. That makes every whisper part of the investigation's moral design. Even the series' humor works when it reveals character rather than simply breaking tension. Gu-cheon's lack of reverence distinguishes him from palace officials who use formality as protection. His exchanges with Saeng-gang give their partnership warmth, allowing later sacrifices and betrayals to matter emotionally. What the East Palace does brilliantly is connect nearly every strength to its central idea. Performance shows people carrying hidden history. Production design turns power into space. Sound lets suppressed voices return. The mystery demonstrates how a false explanation can survive beside a real supernatural threat. The result is a story where the most frightening presence is not always the spirit standing in front of the characters. Sometimes it is the motive that placed the spirit there. The East Palace has an excellent central mechanism, but the series does not always trust that mechanism enough to carry the drama without additional complications. The first problem is pacing. The mystery is strongest when each clue changes our understanding of the curse. At several points, however, the investigation pauses for supernatural encounters or palace maneuvering that adds atmosphere without significantly advancing the central question. Those passages are not empty, but they can make the series feel longer than the emotional journey requires. A limited series benefits from space, yet space creates responsibility. Every detour must either deepen character, sharpen the mystery, or transform the stakes. When a sequence accomplishes only one of those tasks weakly, the momentum becomes uneven. The story then has to rebuild urgency around Prince Yeon and the threatened bloodline after allowing that urgency to fade. The second weakness is tonal control. Gu-cheon's sarcasm and comic frustration give him personality, and some lighter exchanges with Saeng-gang make their bond more believable. The problem comes when humor appears too close to a disturbing supernatural moment. Instead of revealing how the characters cope with fear, it can feel like the series is reassuring us that the danger should not be taken too seriously. That reduces the power of the horror. A frightening image needs time to settle. If the mood changes immediately, the scene becomes an isolated effect rather than part of a growing atmosphere. The series works best when humor emerges from character and weakest when it seems added to maintain a broadly entertaining rhythm. Gu-cheon's attitude can also make his emotional development feel delayed. His indifference is understandable as a protective habit, but the story sometimes repeats that behavior after we already understand its purpose. More early glimpses of the grief beneath his confidence would have made his later devotion to Saeng-gang feel less dependent on the plot pulling them together. Saeng-gang receives stronger emotional material, but even her hidden royal identity could have been explored with greater social detail. Being the king's illegitimate daughter should affect nearly every aspect of how she experiences the palace. The series uses the secret effectively within the mystery, yet it occasionally treats the revelation more as a connection between clues than as a lifelong fracture in her sense of belonging. The supporting court characters vary in depth. The Queen Dowager possesses a strong relationship to legitimacy and succession, but some officials in attendance function mainly as carriers of suspicion, obstruction, or information. Because a palace is supposed to represent an entire system, more distinct motives among those people would have made the institution feel even more dangerous. Fear, ambition, loyalty, and self-preservation should produce different behaviors, not merely different versions of secrecy. The mystery's false solution is clever, although the story sometimes makes a distinction between spiritual categories, inherited abilities, political plots, and family connections harder to follow than necessary. Complexity is not automatically depth. When too many explanations arrive close together, the emotional meaning of a discovery can be overshadowed by the work required to organize it. This especially affects the final revelations. The central idea that human ambition used a real supernatural grievance as cover is powerful, but the chain of responsibility spans multiple generations and several concealed relationships. The series must explain who knew what, who acted, who copied the earlier pattern, and why the king remained silent. The logic holds together, yet the delivery can feel compressed after earlier episodes spent more time on less decisive material. Some visual effects also sit less naturally beside the detailed physical production. The palace interiors, costumes, water, smoke, and practical textures create a convincing world. When a supernatural image looks more digitally separated from that environment, the illusion weakens. The problem is not that fantasy requires realism, it is that every element should appear to belong to the same visual universe. Most importantly, the series could push its moral consequences further. Discovering the truth damages Saeng-gang's trust and exposes the corruption behind the royal line, but the institution itself can feel strangely capable of absorbing revelation. A story disinterested in inherited wrongdoing should show more clearly how truth changes the people forced to continue living inside the system. None of these flaws destroys the experience. The performance's atmosphere and central twist remain effective, but they prevent the East Palace from achieving the precision of its best ideas. The box contains something fascinating. It simply has a few compartments that take too long to open and others that close before we have fully examined what was inside. The East Palace sits at an interesting intersection between Korean historical drama and supernatural investigation. Its closest comparisons reveal both what makes it distinctive and where its execution lacks precision. The first comparison is Kingdom. Both stories place unnatural danger inside a historical political system where admitting the truth could weaken royal authority. In Kingdom, the spreading horror exposes hunger, corruption, and the desperation of rulers trying to preserve legitimacy. The supernatural crisis moves outward across the country, turning political failure into a threat affecting every social class. The East Palace moves in the opposite direction. Its danger contracts around one royal family and one enclosed institution. The question is not how quickly a crisis can spread, but how long the palace can trap the truth inside itself. Kingdom delivers greater urgency, physical momentum, and political scale. The East Palace offers a more intimate examination of inherited guilt and private family history. If you love the combination of period design, royal conspiracy, and supernatural danger here, Kingdom is the strongest choice for what to watch next. It is darker, faster, and more consistent in tone. The Guest provides another revealing comparison because it also follows characters with different supernatural abilities and personal wounds as they investigate a force connected to past trauma. Its atmosphere is heavier and less willing to release tension through comedy. The horror feels invasive, and the emotional damage carried by its central characters remains present even during procedural investigation. The East Palace is visually grander and more playful. Its spirit mythology has greater fantasy spectacle, while The Guest feels closer to spiritual horror. But The Guest is often stronger at making every supernatural encounter deepen the psychological condition of its characters. If Go-chan's humor weakened the fear for you, The Guest offers the more severe and disciplined experience. Bulgasal Immortal Souls shares writers Kwon So-rae and Seo Ye-won with the East Palace, and the connection becomes visible in their interest in resentment moving across generations. Both stories ask whether a curse can ever be separated from the human choices that created it. They also treat supernatural identity as an emotional burden rather than a convenient source of power. Bulgasal stretches its conflict across reincarnation and a much broader timeline. The East Palace confines comparable ideas within royal succession, which gives its mystery a sharper political center. Bulgasal is more openly tragic and romantic. The East Palace is more investigative and institutionally focused. If the inherited curse mythology interested you more than the palace politics, Bulgasal is the natural next step. Alchemy of Souls offers the clearest comparison for tone. It also combines a richly constructed fantasy world, supernatural rules, action, romance, and humor within a setting inspired by historical Korea. Its tonal shifts are more comfortable because the entire world is introduced as a large fantasy adventure. Comedy feels built into its identity from the beginning. The East Palace asks humor to coexist with a more concentrated horror mystery. That makes its shifts riskier. When the balance works, Gu-cheon and Saeng-gang feel human rather than trapped in permanent gloom. When it fails, the haunting loses pressure. Alchemy of Souls handles entertainment and romance more smoothly, while the East Palace offers the stronger atmosphere of secrecy and dread. What the East Palace does that these comparisons do not is make supernatural blame into a political weapon. The palace does not merely fear ghosts, it benefits from believing in the wrong ghost. A genuine spirit becomes cover for human ambition, allowing murder and succession to hide behind an existing legend. That mechanism gives the story's most original compartment. If you love the East Palace, watch Kingdom for political horror, The Guest for intense supernatural investigation, Bulgazal for generation mythology, and Alchemy of Souls for a more romantic fantasy adventure. If you did not enjoy the East Palace because it moved too slowly or shifted tone too often, Kingdom is the best alternative. If you wanted less spectacle and more frightening emotional pressure, choose The Guest. The East Palace may not outperform every comparison, but it combines elements from all four into a mystery with its own identity. A royal institution so skilled at controlling history that even a real ghost becomes useful camouflage. The East Palace arrived at a moment when Korean television no longer needs to simplify its cultural identity for global audiences. International streaming has created space for stories that combine locally rooted mythology with genres understood almost everywhere. IRLU succession crisis, a haunted building, a reluctant supernatural investigator, and a hidden family crime require little cultural translation. The details surrounding those elements, however, remain distinctly Korean. The series uses a fictionalized historical setting rather than presenting itself as a reconstruction of one documented royal court. That freedom allows the creators to borrow the visual language of palace drama without being restricted to one exact political record. Royal rank, concubinage, succession, legitimacy, and court service still provide the social structure, while the invented kingdom gives the supernatural mythology greater freedom. This matters because the title itself carries cultural meaning. The East Palace represents the Crown Prince's household and therefore the continuation of royal authority. For an international viewer, it may initially sound like a geographical location. Inside the story, it is a promise about the future. Haunting that space turns the curse into an attack on political continuity. The series also enters a long tradition of Korean ghost stories centered on unresolved resentment. Its spirits are not interchangeable monsters. Their condition can be connected to how they died, what they desired, or why they remain attached to the human world. The idea of a resentful spirit allows horror to function as social memory. Someone denied justice while alive acquires a form of presence that authority can no longer easily silence. The East Palace modernizes that tradition by complicating moral responsibility. The pawn spirit possesses genuine resentment, but the royal family also uses fear of her to hide human wrongdoing. Folklore does not replace political analysis. It becomes part of the way political history is manipulated. That combination suits the current global appetite for genre hybrids. A series can be promoted as horror, fantasy, mystery, action, romance, or historical drama without anyone label fully describing it. This flexibility helps it reach different groups, but it also explains the divided reaction to its tone. Someone arriving for severe folk horror may find the comedy distracting. Someone expecting a romantic fantasy may find the family crimes unexpectedly dark. Early critical reaction was strongly positive, although the number of published reviews was still small during the first week of release. Praise concentrated on the cinematography, atmosphere, production scale, mythology, and chemistry between Nam Joo-hyuk and Ro Yoon-seo. Reviewers also responded well to the opening mystery and the way the series combines palace politics with supernatural danger. The criticism closely matched the weaknesses we already identified. Some reactions found Jack's playful or immature behavior less compelling than Saeng-gang's emotional complexity. Others questioned whether horror, comedy, romance, and political drama always blend smoothly. That difference reveals the central debate surrounding the series. Is the tonal variety part of its charm, or does it stop the darker material from reaching its full power? Audience response appeared enthusiastic, particularly around the visual design, leap pairing, spirit creatures, and final revelations. Online discussion also demonstrated how quickly individual ghosts and fantasy details could become emotionally memorable outside the main plot. That is useful for a streaming series because distinctive creatures and character moments can circulate independently and encourage new people to enter the larger story. The East Palace also achieved strong visibility on Netflix soon after release. It rose to the top of the service's television ranking in South Korea and appeared prominently across international country charts during its opening week. That early performance does not automatically guarantee long-term cultural importance, but it shows that a historical and supernatural mystery can compete for attention without abandoning its language or local storytelling traditions. There was no meaningful awards history to evaluate at the time of its release. The series was simply too new. Any claim that it had been unfairly ignored or definitively rewarded would therefore be premature. The areas most likely to attract recognition are production design, costume, cinematography, visual effects, sound, and Cho Seung-woo's controlled supporting performance, but that remains an evaluation rather than an award prediction presented as fact. The more interesting cultural question is whether the East Palace will feel timeless. Its visual world is designed to appear historical, but its central anxiety is extremely current. Institutions often protect themselves by controlling which version of the past becomes official. A convenient explanation can survive because it benefits people with power, even when evidence suggests something more complicated. The series turns that process into a supernatural mystery, but the behavior is immediately recognizable. Saeng-gang's gift also reflects a modern concern with unheard testimony. She occupies a low institutional position while carrying information the people above her need. They value her ability without automatically valuing her personhood. Her struggle is not merely to hear the dead, it is to make powerful people respond to voices they would prefer to classify as inconvenient. Gu-cheon represents another contemporary tension. Expertise can be essential while the expert remains distrusted, controlled, or excluded. The king calls him because formal systems have failed, yet still attempts to define the limits of what Juan is allowed to discover. Those ideas give the East Palace a life beyond its release moment. Its streaming presentation and genre mixture belong clearly to the mid-2020s, when Korean fantasy drama is created for both domestic and worldwide audiences. Its deeper conflict, however, is much older. Power writes history. Grief remembers what power removed, and sooner or later, somebody hears the difference. The most debated image in the East Palace is not the destruction of the royal curse. It is the chain still attached to Gu-chan after he returns to the human world. The first and strongest interpretation is that Gu-chan has not truly escaped the realm of Gu. He survives the final confrontation and walks away from the palace with Saeng-gang, but the spiritual chain remains connected to his hand. She cannot see it. He may not fully understand what it means. The victory therefore contains a hidden sentence. This theory is strongly supported by the image itself. Gu-cheon accepted a bargain whose cost was his soul, and the chain represents that agreement continuing beyond the immediate battle. Returning to the human world does not erase the price. It only delays collection. Some people read this as a direct continuation hook. The primordial Guimai may eventually pull Gu-cheon back into the spirit realm, forcing Saeng-gang and their strange companion, the Gomyeok Sali, to rescue him. Even Nam Joo-hyuk publicly suggested the possibility that Gu-cheon could be dragged back one day. The evidence supports the possibility, but not the certainty. The series is presented as a limited story, and the chain also completes Gu-cheon's emotional arc without requiring another season. He begins as someone desperate to avoid becoming the kind of entity he hunts. He ends by accepting that fate to save another person. The chain may therefore represent permanent transformation rather than an unfinished adventure. A second theory asks what actually returned Gu-cheon to the human world. The series shows the chain moving while he expects the primordial Guimai to claim him. He reacts, then awakens beside Saeng-gang. Because the exact mechanism remains unexplained, one interpretation gives the Gomyeok Sali credit. This unusual creature has followed Gu-cheon, complicated his encounters, and eventually leaves the palace with a pair. Its presence in the final departure may indicate that it intervened or altered the bargain. The theory is plausible because the creature occupies a space between menace, companion, and supernatural wildcard. The story repeatedly shows that spiritual beings do not fit simple moral categories. A creature capable of frightening or consuming may also form an attachment. Still, the evidence is incomplete. The Guillemoic Halley's final presence could simply confirm that the trio now belongs together. The series never clearly shows it, breaking the agreement or returning Gu-cheon's soul. Treating that explanation as confirmed would go beyond what the ending provides. A third interpretation sees Gu-cheon's return as the result of his final act rather than outside rescue. By giving his remaining positive energy to Saeng-gang, he appears to surrender his path back. Yet his sacrifice is completely voluntary and directed toward another person. The moral quality of that choice may prevent his transformation from becoming identical to the crown prince's. Both men enter the final confrontation carrying resentment and facing spiritual destruction. The crown prince consumes others to preserve his desire. Gu-cheon gives away what remains of himself so someone else can live. The theory suggests that becoming an Akui is not determined only by supernatural mechanics. Intention may shape what kind of being emerges. The series supports this thematically, although its stated rules still indicate that Gu-cheon pays a genuine price. His compassion does not make the chain disappear. It may explain why he retains enough humanity to return, but not why the spiritual debt remains unresolved. Another debate surrounds the king's apology to the spirits of the plague victims. One reading accepts it as sincere repentance. He finally stops defending his authority and acknowledges people who suffered because of his command. The fact that the spirits release their resentment suggests they recognize something genuine. The opposing reading sees the apology as another act of political survival. The king speaks only when the palace and his own life face destruction. He promises responsibility after silence has failed. From this perspective, the spirits accept practical repair, not moral innocence. The second reading is sharper because forgiveness would be too simple. The king's action weakens the final enemy, but it cannot restore the people lost through his decision. The scene shows accountability beginning, not guilt disappearing. The theory with the least support is that Saeng-gang can eventually remove Gu-cheon's chains simply because of their bond. Emotionally, the idea is appealing. Mechanically, the series provides no clear method. She cannot even see the chain at the end. The relationship may motivate another attempt, but love is not presented as an automatic escape from supernatural consequence. The chain's strongest meaning is therefore also the simplest. Quarzon leaves the palace, but he does not leave the cost of his choice behind. Beneath the ghosts, royal murders, and succession crises, the East Palace is really about the difference between inheriting pain and repeating it. Nearly every important character receives something from the generation before them. The king inherits a throne created through hidden wrongdoing. The crown prince inherits knowledge of that wrongdoing and learns the worst possible lesson from it. Saeng-gang inherits a supernatural ability, a concealed royal identity, and grief surrounding her mother. Gu-cheon inherits trauma from the childhood incident that gave him access to spirits. None of them chose the original wound. Their moral identity is created by what they do after receiving it. The crown prince treats history as permission. Once he learns that earlier violence produced a king, he concludes that similar violence can produce the same reward for him. He does not see the past as a warning. He sees it as a successful method. That is how harmful patterns survive inside families and institutions. People rarely repeat the past while admitting they are repeating it. They tell themselves that the circumstances are different, the need is greater, or the outcome will justify the act. The behavior returns under a new name. The king responds differently, though not innocently. He carries guilt over the way he reached the throne and refuses to let his son repeat that path. Yet he protects the original secret, uses force, and continues deciding which lives are expendable for stability. He rejects the repetition he can recognize while remaining blind to the parts of it that have become normal inside him. Saeng-gang offers the story's clearest alternative. She uncovers that people connected to her own family participated in terrible decisions, but she does not convert betrayal into permission for cruelty. Her pain gives her a reason to listen more carefully, not an excuse to silence others. That makes her supernatural lived meaningful. Hearing the dead is not valuable because the dead are automatically right. Spirits can be confused, resentful, deceptive, or destructive. Her gift matters because it forces her to remain in contact with consequences that powerful people would prefer to forget. In ordinary life, we do not hear ghosts speaking from palace corridors. We do inherit unfinished stories. Families avoid certain names, institutions celebrate achievements while removing the people harmed along the way. Communities repeat simplified accounts because the complete truth would demand responsibility. The East Palace turns that familiar silence into sound. Saeng-gang's real power is not hearing. It is continuing to listen after the message becomes personally painful. Gu-cheon's deeper journey moves from avoidance to responsibility. At first, he treats his abilities as an unwanted condition and limits his involvement whenever possible. That resistance makes sense. He has already paid for the connection with his childhood, and the palace has no right to treat his suffering as a public resource. But responsibility does not remain the same as obedience. Gu-cheon eventually stops acting because the king commands him and begins acting because he has chosen whom he refuses to abandon. That difference transforms sacrifice from exploitation into agency. The chain attached to him at the end captures the uncomfortable cost of that choice. Love does not always free a person from consequences. Sometimes love is the reason someone willingly accepts them. The story avoids the easy message that a selfless action automatically restores everything. Gu-cheon saves Saeng-gang, but the spiritual bond remains. His freedom is therefore incomplete, yet it is more genuine than the freedom he possessed before entering the palace. Earlier, he could live outside royal walls while still being controlled by fear of what he might become. At the end, he carries the visible possibility of that transformation, but has decided what kind of person he wants to be. The palace itself symbolizes a family system built around appearances. Its gates define who officially belongs. Saeng-gang carries royal blood but lives without royal recognition. Gu-cheon enters as a prisoner but becomes morally freer than many people born inside. The crown prince occupies the position of future ruler while becoming trapped by the worst part of the past. Status and belonging are not the same thing. Water becomes the boundary between the life people display and the resentment they submerge. The pond reflects the palace above it, but beneath the surface lies a world shaped by everything the palace refuses to resolve. Entering that water means moving below the official image. The recurring movement between worlds also asks whether truth belongs exclusively to one reality. Human evidence proves part of the conspiracy. Spirits reveal what records omit. Emotional memory exposes what political language disguises. No single system provides the complete answer. Even the so-called curse changes meaning. At first, it appears to be a supernatural punishment placed on the royal family. By the end, the real curse is imitation. One person commits violence for succession. Another hides it. A younger generation discovers that hidden history and repeats the method. The prophecy fulfills itself because people act according to the story they fear. This connects to something painfully human. We often think breaking a cycle means proving that we are nothing like the people who harmed us. The East Palace suggests a more difficult task. We must identify which of their behaviors have already entered us, especially the ones disguised as protection, duty, or necessity. The king cannot change what placed him on the throne. Saeng-gang cannot change her mother's choices. Gu-cheon cannot return to the life he had before spirits entered it. None of them can repair the past by pretending it never happened. They can only decide what the inherited pain becomes next. That is the deeper truth inside the East Palace. A legacy is not simply what blood passes down. A legacy is what the next person refuses to repeat. The East Palace is far too new for anyone to claim that it has already changed television, transformed the historical fantasy genre, or directly influenced later productions. Legacy requires time. A strong opening week, positive reviews, and international streaming visibility can demonstrate immediate interest. They cannot show whether a story will remain culturally meaningful after the promotional moment passes. No later series can yet be reliably connected to its influence, and its reputation has not existed long enough to grow, collapse, or be rediscovered. What we can evaluate is the tradition it enters and the contribution it may make within the tradition. Historical Korean dramas have long used the royal court as a place where private desire becomes national consequence. Supernatural dramas have similarly used spirits to represent unresolved pain. The East Palace combines those forms by making the hunting part of the political machinery rather than a separate threat placed on top of it. Its most valuable idea is the existence of both the real spirit and a false history constructed around that spirit. Human characters do not merely misunderstand supernatural events, they deliberately exploit belief in those events. That allows the series to avoid a familiar choice between two explanations. Either the palace is haunted or humans committed the crime. Both are true. The spirit carries genuine resentment. The murders also involve calculated ambition. The supernatural legend becomes effective camouflage because the palace has already created conditions in which people expect the legend to explain everything. That mechanism could become the series' lasting contribution. It gives future genre storytellers a useful model for combining folklore with mystery. Mythology does not need to remove human accountability, and political crime does not need to make the supernatural meaningless. Each layer can change how the other is understood. The visual presentation may also contribute to the continuing international image of Korean historical fantasy as premium global television. The East Palace does not treat palace architecture, traditional clothing, folk horror imagery, and spirit mythology as niche material requiring constant explanation. It assumes that an international audience can learn through context. That confidence matters. Global storytelling becomes less interesting when every cultural detail is simplified into something immediately familiar. The realm of Gwai, the distinctions among spirits, and the meaning of the East Palace ask viewers to enter a particular imaginative world rather than demanding that the world reshape itself around them. The series may also be remembered as part of a larger movement toward shorter, self-contained Korean streaming productions. Its limited structure allows the primary conspiracy to reach an ending while leaving one supernatural thread open through Gu-cheon's chain. That approach provides closure without removing all possibility of continuation. Whether the ending strengthens the legacy will depend on what happens next. If there is never another chapter, the chain works as a final reminder that sacrifice carries a permanent cost. If the story continues, the new chapter must justify reopening the box. Simply repeating another palace curse would weaken what made this mystery distinct. The performances have the strongest chance of maintaining interest. Roh Yoon-so gives Saeng-gang an emotional identity beyond romance or supernatural usefulness. Nam Joo-hyuk uses Gu-chan's physical confidence and defensive humor to create an unusual fantasy hero. Cho Sang-woo delivers the morally complicated king without simplifying him into a secret villain or misunderstood victim. Their relationships could age better than some of the visual effects because emotional contradiction tends to survive technological change. A frightened king protecting a corrupted legacy, a daughter hearing truths her family buried, and an outsider accepting a chain to save someone he loves remain powerful ideas even after the novelty of the creatures fades. The reputation of the East Palace will ultimately depend on which memory proves stronger. People may remember a visually ambitious fantasy with charismatic leads, inventive spirits, and an absorbing royal mystery. They may also remember uneven pacing, unstable tone, and a finale carrying more explanation than its earlier episodes prepared smoothly. Both memories would be fair. For now, its place in film and television history is not that of a proven landmark. It is a promising example of how culturally specific folklore can support internationally accessible genre storytelling without losing its political meaning. The East Palace has not changed the genre yet, but it has opened a compartment worth exploring again. The possibility that a society's ghosts are frightening, not because they oppose history, but because they expose how history was manufactured. Alright? Full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The central deception begins 30 years before Gu-chan enters the palace. A favored court woman becomes pregnant by the previous king. The queen, now the queen dowager, cannot tolerate the woman's position and arranges for her to be falsely accused of an affair with a royal guard. The woman loses her child, is condemned by the palace, and dies carrying overwhelming resentment. She promises to return as a Wangui and destroy the royal bloodline. This threat is real, but it does not cause the original deaths in the way palace history claims. The present king's biological mother sees the condemned woman's curse and recognizes the perfect cover for her own ambition. Her son is far down the succession line. If the princes before him die, he can inherit the throne while everyone blames the supernatural threat. She poisons those princes and allows fear of the pawn spirit to explain the pattern. That is the first major reveal. The legend is not entirely false. The wronged woman truly becomes a resentful spirit. But a living conspirator uses that genuine haunting to disguise calculated crimes. The palace does not invent the ghost. It assigns the ghost responsibility for acts committed by humans. Saeng-gang's mother helps carry out the plan. Once the murders are complete, however, Saeng-gang's grandmother removes her too because she knows enough to expose everything. Saeng-gang consequently discovers that the two women shaping her identity are connected to the same hidden crime. The mother she mourned participated under royal pressure, and the clan mother who sheltered her was responsible for the entire chain. The king also knew what his mother had done. This explains why he is so certain that the original curse did not kill the princess, even though he cannot publicly reveal how he knows. Admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that his throne was created by murder. The present-day deaths repeat that strategy. The crown prince possesses the same ability to hear spirits that appears in the king's maternal line and later emerges in Saeng-gang. The dead reveal how his grandmother eliminated the earlier heirs and made his father king. Instead of treating the truth as a warning, he converts it into instruction. He poisons his older brothers, expecting the palace to blame the returning curse. The plan works because the false history has never been corrected. Everyone already knows which ghost is supposed to be responsible. The king eventually recognizes what his son has done. He cannot accept a successor who has copied the crime that placed him on the throne, so he kills the crown prince. This is the death presented at the beginning of the series, but the king repeats the same concealment. He allows the pawn spirit to receive blame because exposing his son would expose the family history behind the son's method. The crown prince dies believing that he has been punished for doing what an earlier generation did successfully. His resentment transforms him into an akwi, a spirit consumed beyond the point where ordinary release is possible. He then kills Prince Yongen, completing the destruction of the king's direct heirs. This is why defeating the pawn spirit does not end the crisis. Gu-cheon reaches the wrong court woman and severs the resentment, keeping her in the human realm. She passes on, but Yongen still dies because she was never the true cause of the present pattern. The repeated message that the king is the real evil does not mean he personally committed every murder. It identifies him as the living center of the concealed history. He knows why the throne is corrupted, kills his crown prince to stop another cycle, and then preserves the same lie that allowed the cycle to exist. The crown prince grows stronger by using other spirits, including people who died after the king ordered a plague-stricken village destroyed to contain disease. That decision returns as another form of buried consequence. The king treated the villagers as expendable for the security of the realm. In the spirit world, their unresolved suffering becomes an army marching back toward him. This prepares the ending's most important reversal. The king has spent the series controlling information and people through command. Force cannot end the final attack because force created many of the spirits supporting it. He must acknowledge responsibility. During the appeasement rite, the king apologizes to the dead and promises to care for the families they left behind. He also accepts that they may claim his soul after death if his actions do not repair the damage. The villagers release their resentment, weakening the crown prince's spirit. The apology does not make the king innocent. It removes the excuse that authority cannot answer to people beneath it. Before the final confrontation, a supernatural premonition warns that Gu-cheon will die. Sang-gang refuses to let that happen. She incapacitates him temporarily and enters the realm of Kui alone. intending to face the crown prince herself. Her decision completes her movement from royal instrument to independent moral agent. The king originally sends her to monitor Gu-cheon. Now she acts against Gu-cheon's wishes and beyond the king's control because she has decided which life she will protect. The crown prince targets her because she is the king's illegitimate daughter. Destroying Saeng-gang would complete his attack on the royal bloodline. When Gu-cheon awakens, he follows her and accepts a bargain with the primordial Gi for the weapon capable of destroying an Akui. The cost is severe. Destroying the crown prince's soul will turn Gu-cheon into the very kind of being he has spent his life resisting. He chooses to proceed. The king's apology weakens the crown prince enough for Gu-cheon to destroy him. Gu-cheon then transfers his remaining positive life energy to Saeng-gang so she can return to the human world. He accepts the spiritual consequence and becomes chained to the realm of Kwai. Then the chain moves. Expecting the primordial Guemi to claim him, Gu-cheon reacts and unexpectedly awakens in the human world beside Saeng-gang. The series never fully explains the mechanism of his return. The Yigumok-sali may have intervened, or Gu-cheon's retained humanity may have altered the result. What matters is that his survival is not complete freedom. The king finally releases him, and Gu-cheon leaves the palace with Saeng-gang and the Gyeogu-chali. Saeng-gang sees a future outside the institution that concealed her identity and exploited her gift. Gu-cheon receives the freedom originally denied to him, but the final image reveals the spiritual chain still attached to his hand. That chain connects the ending to the story's first contradiction. The palace imprisoned Gu-cheon physically, while the spirit realm now holds an invisible claim over him. He walks freely yet carries a bond Saeng-gang-si. Escape and captivity coexist. Several earlier details acquire new meaning after the reveal. The East Palace is the home of the future ruler, but every generation uses the future to repeat the past. The pond reflects royal order while hiding a falsely accused spirit beneath it. The ability to hear the dead passes through the same family whose authority depends on silencing them. Even the king's denial is double-edged. He is correct that humans caused the murders, but he uses that truth to conceal his connection to them. There is no separate post-credit scene required to understand the ending. The chain is a fine and unresolved truth. My reaction is divided. The ending contains a strong moral design and gives Gu-cheon's sacrifice genuine weight. The human conspiracy is more interesting than a simple supernatural culprit. Yet the large amount of explanation and Gu-cheon's unexplained return soften the final impact. His survival offers emotional relief, while the chain restores some consequence. The box closes on an image of two people leaving the palace together, but one of them is still connected to everything beneath it. The East Palace receives a personal rating of 5 out of 10. That score may seem severe for a series with such impressive production design, strong performances, and an intelligent central twist. But a rating should reflect the complete experience, not only the quality of its best compartments. The series builds a striking world. Its palace interiors feel elegant and oppressive at the same time. The realm of grief provides haunting visual contrast. Ro Yeon-seo gives Saeng-gang emotional strength without removing her vulnerability, while Cho Song-woo turns the king into a fascinating mixture of authority, guilt, love, and self-protection. Nam Joo-hyuk brings physical confidence and unpredictable energy to Gu-cheon. The mystery also contains one genuinely excellent idea: a real spirit is blamed for crimes committed by living people, and a false explanation becomes so deeply established that a younger generation eventually uses it again. That connection between folklore, political ambition, and inherited behavior gives the story far more meaning than a conventional curse narrative. But the series takes too long to reveal the full power of that idea. Uneven pacing weakens the urgency. Tonal changes sometimes release fear before it can settle. The mythology, family history, spiritual classifications, and royal conspiracy become crowded together, forcing later episodes to explain relationships that should have developed more naturally. Some supporting characters remain functional rather than fully alive, and Gu-cheon's final return lacks enough explanation to make the emotional resolution completely satisfying. The chain attached to his hand repairs part of that problem by preserving the cost of his sacrifice. It tells us that survival is not the same as escape. Still, the ending would have landed harder if the series had distributed its revelations more evenly and trusted silence as much as spectacle. You should watch The East Palace if you enjoy Korean historical fantasy, supernatural investigations, royal conspiracies, spirit mythology, elaborate production design, and lead characters whose abilities are connected to personal trauma. It is especially suitable for anyone who appreciates stories where the apparent monster is only one layer of a larger human crime. You may not connect with it if you want relentless horror, tightly compressed storytelling, consistent seriousness, or a romance placed squarely at the center. The playful moments, mythological explanations, and extended investigation may feel frustrating if you prefer a cleaner mystery. This is unquestionably a streaming experience. The series was created for Netflix and its chapter-based structure suits watching across several sessions. It does not need a theatrical environment, although a large screen and strong sound system will help the palace, spiritual, and quieter supernatural details make their full impression. Would I recommend watching it? Yes, but with measured expectations. Its atmosphere and premise are worth experiencing, even if the complete execution never becomes as precise as the story's central idea deserves. The East Palace begins with the belief that a ghost is destroying the future. It ends by revealing that the future was taught to repeat the past. That is the final truth inside this box. The dead created the warning, but the living created the curse. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. Thank you for staying with me through every hidden chamber of the East Palace. We followed a voice beneath the palace, separated supernatural resentment from human ambition, and discovered why the most dangerous secret was never resting at the bottom of the pond. It was moving through the royal family from one generation to another. If this breakdown helped you see the story differently, support the Film Box by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. That simple action helps us continue opening more stories with the depth, honesty, and curiosity they deserve. Now I want to hear your interpretation. Do you believe Gu-cheon truly escaped the realm of Kwai, or does the final chain mean that his freedom is only temporary? Share your answer in the comments and tell me whether you think the king's final apology represented genuine change or one last attempt to protect his throne. There is no easy answer, and that is exactly why the ending remains worth discussing. Thank you for giving this story your time and for opening the box with me. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.